The Imperium of Man runs on the blood of martyrs who dedicate themselves to shedding the blood of its enemies. The best way to extract that blood is to rend it from them with the roar of Prometheum engines and the whir of adamantine chain blades. Reginald here, and it's time to bring faith, fire, fury, and most of all, whirring death to the enemies of the Emperor of Mankind. In this video, I'm going to present to you 3 unique and interesting Zealot class builds centered on chain weapons, each a different chain weapon, and then I'm going to provide you 6 different ways to build your chain weapons, 2 for each weapon. Finally, I'm going to provide you a short discussion and some data on the current position of chain weapons in Darktide, how good they are, and how much better they are than they used to be. I've roped up about 1,000 hours of this game so far, and I still like playing it an awful lot. 700 of those hours have probably been nothing but chain weapons, more or less, and most of the time I'm running the chain axe. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that too when we get there. Without further ado, let's hop right into the build guide. The only detail I want to add is that the Curios for all my builds are the same at +9 stamina with a bunch of gunner resist and stamina regeneration and ability regeneration. All the builds will be linked below so that you can go see them in detail yourself. This is build 1, Faith. Build name, Reginald's Blessed Bloodthirsty Ballet. Intended role, do everything, tanky, high damage, go fast, crit alt spam, support build. It is by far my most ambitiously idiosyncratic build. Weaponry, we're going to be using the Eviscerator, or Heavy Chainsword as it is rightly called, and Revolver. Blessings. For the Eviscerator, I will be using Bloodthirsty and Rampage. Bloodthirsty is non-optional, Rampage is recommended. For the Revolver, I will use Speed Load and Surgical. Swap to your preference. Key nodes. The key nodes for this build are Immolation Grenade, Beacon of Purity, Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude, Inexorable Judgment, and Invocation of Death. Priority nodes, we're going to be leveraging Until Death, Enemies Within, Enemies Without, Restoring Faith, and Swift Certainty to maximize tankiness both through dodging and through restorative toughness generation. Notably, there are a number of movement speed nodes, consistent with my Zoom Zealot build, as well as Swift Certainty, which gets you pretty close to the same general movement speed as my Zoom Zealot build, and general utility thanks to Inexorable Judgment. I'd like to call out here that Sainted Gunslinger stacks with Speed Load and allows you to reload your weapon very quickly, especially if it's a revolver. However, Sainted Gunslinger doesn't expire, so if you need to fire your weapon later and then reload off the benefit of a conflict that happened much before, that's viable. It's a pretty nice little benefit, and that's why I tend to go to the left side on this path than the right. I'd like to pause here and briefly discuss the viability and value of this build. It of course is quite viable, and I've taken it into Auric Maelstrom missions with great success. In fact, I think it might be one of my best builds, though it has some drawbacks in terms of general usability. The basic gist is, you can force out crits with Bloodthirsty as much as you want. Every swing if you want. You just have to continually rev Heavy 1 to get those crits on Bloodthirsty. However, if you don't like to do that, you're still taking advantage of Rampage, and you can do rev Heavy 1 into the returning Light 3 in order to get a crit on the quick return swing with lots of cleave and damage too, which makes it feel more usable, though you reduce your crit rate by about 50%. Because this build has the majority of the same damage buffs as my Zoom Zealot build, including the Inexorable Judgment buff and the other nodes that are scattered around the board, you're actually taking advantage of a lot of base damage here that would otherwise make this a perfectly viable weapon if it was just Rampage and Savage Sweep, for example. As a consequence, if you haven't used your ult yet and are planning to save Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude for some reason, you can just fight normally without worrying about using Bloodthirsty, and that makes this build feel more flexible rather than relying on it entirely for all of your damage. Let's get into a demo. We'll take about a minute to watch some gameplay so that we can know how this plays. Build name, Reginald's Catastrophic Crit Cleaver build. What can I say? I like alliteration, and don't try to say that too fast, you might run into trouble. I tend to find the chainsword is a little on the short side, and with this square tip it really does resemble a cleaver, so it felt appropriate considering what this thing does. Intended role? High finesse, crit cooldown reduction, support build with a versatile ranged kit, and a home for the purifying power of fire. Weaponry, chainsword and flamer, complemented by blades of faith. Blessings. For the chainsword, I will be leveraging Shred and Wrath to maximize spamming lights with improved cleave for high-octane crit generation. You could take Devastating Strike, but I find Wrath to be the more consistent choice. For the flamer, I am running Blaze Away and Inspiring Barrage. The latter is to your taste, but Blaze Away is a given. Key nodes: Blades of Faith, Beacon of Purity, Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude, Blazing Piety, Invocation of Death, and Righteous Warrior. Priority nodes: Until Death is always a good priority node. Otherwise, I really recommend taking Scourge for this build, since it is a crit build and you're going to want those bleeds. If you have a little extra space, you can always play around. But Sustained Assault and Faithful Frenzy are two solid nodes to grab. Let's jump into a brief discussion. This build is definitely the squishiest of all the builds I've tried so far. It doesn't have the same toughness generation capacity that other builds have, so be aware of that. It's also not as fast moving as other builds, and as a consequence I tend to lean on the flamer when I need to hit something a little further away without diving into melee with it. Sometimes the chainsword can struggle just a little bit against tougher groups of enemies, and so the flamer really comes in clutch there, like groups of elites or something, to soften them up on the way in, or just burn them all down. Blaze of Faith is a strong choice here because it lets you snipe those specials, especially snipers, from time to time if you get bogged down in a position where you can't easily get to them in melee or with your flamer. This build will generate a ton of crits, and does quite well on horde clear, so you don't really have to worry that much, but it's intended to be more of a fun, thematic build, where you're leveraging lots of different finesse and flame-based techniques to get lots of magical, faith-based thinking out there into the world. From what I can tell, this isn't too far off from most people's crit builds, but I think you'll find it really fun anyway, and I like the weapon combination a lot. Let's hop into a quick demo so I can show you what this gameplay looks like.
Got a bunch of counters back here.
Build name, Reginald's Rapid-onset Ravager build. Intended role, high octane, high speed, go everywhere, kill everything real fast like Assault and Destruction build. Weaponry, Chain Axe and Spearhead Bolt Gun. Blessings, the Assault Chain Axe leverages Bloodletter and Headtaker or Slaughterer, the choice is yours, to maximize damage to unyielding enemies and maniacs. It's preferentially built with maniacs and unyielding as perks, and in this case there's some particularity there that I'll get to later. The Bolt Gun is built with unyielding enemy damage and maniac damage, lucky me, with Shattering Impact and either Pinning Fire or Blaze Away. If I had Blaze Away on this, that would be better. Key nodes, Stunstorm Grenade, Benediction, Fury of the Faithful, and Redoubled Zeal, Inexorable Judgment, and Swift Certainty. Finally, Restoring Fate. I know this build is really just my Type B Zoom Zealot build I already proposed, but as a consequence of being able to actually beat monstrous specials with this build as opposed to my Zoom Zealot build, due to the extra tankiness provided by the combination of Restoring Faith and Holy Revenant, I really find this build to be worthwhile and deserve its own name. Priority nodes here for this build are Thy Wrath Be Swift and all of the movement speed nodes you can get your hands on, but I also like Punishment as a general survivability buff, and Faithful Frenzy as a general attack speed buff. Let's hop into a brief discussion on this build. As a consequence of winning that monstrous specials with my Chain Axe at long last, and it was a lot easier thanks to the power advantages this build provides me compared to my old build, I would have won it eventually, but I never got the chance. This build has become a favorite of mine in general. The extra tankiness just feels right, even though I do lose out on 5% movement speed. I think that's worth the trade-off. Ultimately, the Rapid-onset Ravager build is a strong build that feels really good to play, and is just a little bit more reliable. The upshot of this build is just like my Zoom Zealot build. This is weapon agnostic, so you can really use whatever you like. However, I want to add that the bolt gun here has an advantage in boss slaying over other options because you can get that massive spike in rate of fire that you can't otherwise get with this build. This makes it very strong for sniping the backs of beasts of Nurgle. Since the things tend to move around a lot, it's very hard to stay on target against the boil on the back unless you mag dump very quickly sometimes, and this will definitely get you that. But really take whatever you like, including other build chain weapons, which will lead me into the conversation on how you can build other chain weapons. Let's get a demo in of what this looks like, with fabulous commentary by the venerable Wildspice.
Hey, that feels horrible.
Oh, you've got a shotgunner issue there. Oh, look at this chain axe gameplay. What a treat. Easy.
Easy.
Hey, yo, Reginald, relax, bro.
I can't. This is the Zoom Zealot build. I smoked all of the meth before I started. Coming. Oh, that was sideways. What is this? Walks,
Man,
you
that's
gotta get me.
brutal.
He's not gonna get me. He's going for
Yeah,
guts.
he's not.
That was unstaggerable from the ceiling.
Oh, he's gonna get us. Staggered it.
Now he's gonna get us. I think he's gonna get us.
Oh, going for the bull rush save.
Big saves, big bull
ass.
rush. That was actually fantastic.
Yeah, you show that flame.
Oh, not this time.
Oh, that bolt gun thing is so funny. It cracks me up.
Stop.
Ah, yes. Here we have a wild Reginald showing off his chain axe.
Alright, I know what you're thinking. You're really gonna showcase this build with you getting trapped and then dying a little bit later? Absolutely. First of all, the timing was hysterical, you have to admit. And second of all, it's not like I'm shy about dying. I've played a lot of this game, and I'm very good at it, but I still die in this game, which is why I like it so much. It's hard enough, even though I've played so much of it, that I can still lose. That's great. Plus, credit where it's due, Walks totally pulled off an excellent rescue on 2 of us. That was pretty great. But lastly, let's be honest, the gameplay there was good. I did some really fun stuff, and I demonstrated how smooth and entertaining this gameplay can be, and if you don't believe me, let me just back out to like a few minutes earlier in the same sequence.
I'm not even just beyond the lift. It's actually ruined you there.
I need to look in the crates for ammo.
Miss me, nerd. I'm better than you.
Oh, wow.
I'm better than you too.
How about him and him?
I figure this is a good enough place for this interlude. I've heard it said around the net somewhere that the chain axe just doesn't have good fluid gameplay, and I think I've put paid to that idea with these clips, so it more than satisfactorily showcases this build, in my opinion. That's a pretty good jumping off point to discuss the state of chain weapons in Darktide right now, and the data I've gathered on that subject, and then I'll get to the build, since obviously these things are informed by the data. And I have some of that data now, and I'm still processing through some of the stuff I've already recorded, but it looks like this. And for those of you not familiar with my aggressive testing protocol, this is an experimental protocol I've developed to actually test weapons in situation. I spawn into a solo map, no bots, nothing like that, and then I spawn in a bunch of enemies in a corridor near the beginning of the map, and I use that to actually fight those enemies in the way that I would in a real game. I then use video editing software to get times and cut out any kind of weird outliers that don't need to be there. My testing types are 50 Poxwalkers, 20 Scab Bruisers, and 4 Crushers. By using these experimental conditions, I can get a controlled environment where I can actually check to see how a weapon performs and suss out what might need to be done to make a weapon better. But rather than having you read this whole big long thing, let me just summarize for you, since I know a fair bit at this point. I haven't finished all my testing from a calculation standpoint, but fighting Crushers feels about the same, if a little faster. The Chainsword, however, has lost out because it's no longer able to benefit from Chastise the Wicked being able to body check Crushers. They're immune to that stagger now. Crushers also just don't get staggered by Chainsword's sawing attacks, so it doesn't really matter. It's actually really hard to do. Other than Crushers feeling basically the same, maybe a little easier in some ways, the chain weapons have improved tremendously in the area they were weakest in. They're now excellent horde clear weapons that at least align as well as any of the best horde clear weapons from patch 12 and 11. With the right build, your chain weapon of choice, whichever of the three you choose, can clear hordes very well and still slap the big boys down with those somewhat risky special attacks. One last thing before we get into the builds that I'm going to propose here. The chain weapons have definitely had some breakpoint shifts. The one I care about most is really against Maniacs. You see, the Mutant was always a priority target for chain weapons, and getting over the one-shot breakpoint has always been key. With the right build, the Small Eviscerator and the Chain Axe were both capable of getting it, as long as you get about 25% Maniacs and a good roll. And we're using the special attack. The main difference is the Chainsword now can too, and actually can do so with a light rev attack. The Chain Axe can't, either with light or heavy, though the Chain Axe rev attacks were buffed and the lights do almost as much damage as the heavies now. That seems to be merely a weird oversight that Fat Shark seems to have had with the Chain Axe as opposed to the Chainsword and the Small Chainsword. For this reason, I recommend on the Chain Axe at least you continue to take plus Maniacs as a priority perk, and plus Unyielding is your second choice as an ideal one. For the other two chain weapons, however, you can ditch plus Maniacs unless you really hate Dreg Ragers, because that's the only other thing you need to worry about that you can't one-shot. So with that in mind, let's get into the weapon builds themselves. For the Micro Eviscerator, you're going to want to choose one of these two builds based on your intent. For the crit build that I propose today, you do need Bloodthirsty, and you should run Rampage. Otherwise, a classical build you can slot onto whatever build you feel like is Rampage and Savage Sweep. I think that's still a strong choice. For the Chainsword, you can use the build I proposed earlier with Shred and Wrath, or you can take advantage of a more classical build with Rampage and Savage Sweep, just like the Micro Eviscerator. For the Chain Axe, you can definitely run Bloodletter, which will take you over the line on one-hit KOs on Reapers, which is pretty nice. Likewise, you're going to want to use either Slaughterer or Headtaker based on your preference. Headtaker will net you more boss damage if that's your thing, but Slaughterer will definitely dramatically improve your time to kill on hordes. If you're not satisfied with your total damage output, you can run Headtaker and Slaughterer, and that can be a pretty mean Chain Axe too. Because my Rapid-onset Ravager build is weapon agnostic, if you do decide to go with these alternative blessing arrangements, then that build is the perfect build for it. Alright, I think I got everything I was aiming for there, although I had a whole bunch of other ideas I thought I wanted to cram in here, but 18 minutes is long enough. You'll probably be 20 by the time you're out of here. I do want to add one more thing on my way out the door, which is that Jesper Kid has been nominated by the Recording Academy for the video game soundtrack category. Jesper Kid is the composer for the soundtrack for Darktide, and honestly, congratulations. Like, that's really awesome. That you deserve it, Jesper. I don't know you personally, but your music is fantastic. This is really a stellar soundtrack, and so I hope you win. With that, I would just like to say thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you coming to visit. If you did enjoy this content and want to see more, you can always hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, so you get notified, and do the whole comment thing as well. I actually really like to chat with everybody, so if you leave me a comment, I will respond to you. And other than that, have a great rest of your weekend, because I should be getting this out on Saturday.
The master of mankind summons us to war!
Goodbye, everyone.